They say a father is meant to be your first protector, the man who teaches you love, safety, and kindness. But for me, my father was none of those things. He was the shadow in every room, the fear in every heartbeat, the cruelty that shaped my childhood into a nightmare I could never escape. While other children laughed, I learned silence. While others were held in warm arms, I braced for the cold sting of his words, his punishments, his fists. Every scar he left on me wasn't just on my skin, it carved itself into my soul. I grew up believing I was worthless. That pain was the only thing I deserved. But life has a way of changing the weak. Because when you've lived through hell, you learn how to walk through fire without burning. My father thought his cruelty had broken me forever. He thought I would stay silent, obedient, afraid. But what he never understood was that silence is not weakness. It is waiting. And I waited. I grew. I planned. Now I am no longer the frightened girl he used to control. Now I am the storm he never saw coming. This is not the story of my suffering. This is the story of how I avenged it. Most children remember their fathers as heroes. I remember mine as the man whose footsteps made me tremble. His name was Richard Hayes. To the world, he was a respected businessman, a man people admired for his discipline and authority. But behind closed doors, in the walls of our home, he was something else entirely. My earliest memories are not of bedtime stories or gentle hugs. They are of screams echoing down the hallway, the sting of leather against skin, and the sound of my mother crying behind locked doors. I was only 7 when I first learned to read the warning signs. The sharp slam of the front door, the heavy thud of his shoes, the smell of whiskey on his breath. That was the moment fear settled in my stomach, because I knew what was coming. He would find the smallest mistake, a glass left on the table, homework unfinished, laughter that was too loud. And for each mistake, his punishment was swift and merciless. "Useless child," he would spit, his voice filled with venom. And I believed him. For years I lived in that prison, not of bars, but of silence. School was supposed to be my sanctuary, my escape, but even there, his shadow loomed. My father demanded absolute perfection. Straight A's weren't a suggestion. They were a command. Flawless behavior, achievements to show off to his friends. Anything less meant I'd pay for it the moment I walked through the door. We never celebrated birthdays. He called them a waste of money. Laughter was a foreign sound in our house, and tears were a sign of weakness he wouldn't tolerate. I never heard the word love from him. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to the sound of our neighbors' laughter floating through the window, an ache for a life that felt so out of reach. My mother, also a prisoner in that house, would sometimes hold me close when he wasn't looking and whisper, "One day, you'll be free." Those words were my lifeline. Freedom was my only dream, but freedom wasn't going to be easy, and revenge. That would take years of silent planning. By the time I turned 16, fear was in my blood. But so was anger. My father thought he had broken me, that I was nothing more than a trembling shadow. But inside, I was quietly collecting every wound, every insult, every scar he left. They weren't just memories, they were weapons. His cruelty had stolen my childhood, but I refused to let it own my future. One night, after a brutal beating just for scoring second in class, I locked myself in my room. Staring into a cracked mirror, my lip was split and my cheek was swollen, but my eyes burned with something new. I whispered to myself, "One day, I'll make you pay." That was the night the real me was born. Not the weak child he tried to mold, but the girl who would one day stand tall enough to destroy the monster in her home. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe and follow along. Thanks for listening. Freedom didn't come from just running away. It came from patience. At 17, I started working small jobs in secret. I'd tutor younger kids, and sometimes I'd write assignments for classmates who were overwhelmed. Every single penny I earned went into an old shoebox, hidden away under a loose floorboard in my room. My father never had a clue. He was too lost in his own world. But my mother, she noticed. She couldn't say anything, but she'd give me these small, knowing nods. Silence was our shared language, our shield. Each coin I saved wasn't just money. It was a brick in the foundation of my new life. a step toward proving he hadn't broken me. I told myself it was about showing him I could rise above it all, but deep down, I knew I wanted him to see what he'd lost. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonates with you, please consider subscribing for more. The morning I left, the house smelled like stale cigarettes and old arguments. I packed my life into one battered suitcase, a couple of dresses, a shoebox of savings, my school certificates, and a heart full of promises. My mother watched from the doorway, her eyes hollow but proud. She just mouthed, "Be safe," and handed me a handkerchief. Walking out that door felt like cutting a tether I'd worn for years. The air outside tasted different, colder, cleaner, full of possibilities. I hailed a bus with trembling hands but a steady heart. Every mile that passed was a small victory. I didn't have a solid plan, just fierce determination. I found a tiny room above a bakery, and that night, lying on the narrow mattress, I whispered to myself, "This is the beginning." I wasn't running away because I was weak. I was moving forward because I was growing. Freedom isn't free. It's lonely sometimes, but every challenge is a reminder that I chose this path. A life with my name on it. The first few months were brutal. I worked at a cafe from dawn to dusk, washing cups, serving bread, my fingers raw. At night, I'd pore over borrowed business textbooks from the library, trading sleep for progress. People at the cafe just saw the girl with tired eyes. But every day I showed up. I smiled when it hurt, and I saved every single coin. One evening, a woman named Claire noticed me studying. "Why are you studying so late?" she asked. I took a chance and told her a piece of my truth, about needing to build a new life, to one day be free. She didn't just offer sympathy. She told me about an accounting program at the local college. Her kindness was a lifeline. With every lesson, I wasn't just learning numbers. I was learning how power works. I wasn't just saving for a safer room. I was gathering the tools to dismantle a past built on cruelty. Thank you for listening. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe for more. Years have flown by, and that scared, trembling girl I once was, she's long gone. By 23, I'd carved out a name for myself. It was small, but it was all mine. I went from scrubbing plates in a cafe to signing contracts as a junior accountant. The very numbers my father worshipped, the ones he used to rule our lives, became my weapon. It's funny how that works out, isn't it? I upgraded my life, a better apartment, tailored suits, and a voice that commanded respect. But every night, looking in the mirror, I'd see her again, that 16-year-old girl making promises to herself in the dark. I never forgot her. Then, one evening, his name popped up on my screen. Hayes Industries, my father's company. My heart hammered in my chest. After all these years of looking away, fate had just handed him to me. As I dug into the records, I found them. Inconsistencies, hidden debts, and for the first time in a long, long time, I genuinely smiled. I had found his weakness. If you're as captivated by this story as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching. Digging into Hayes Industries was dangerous, but I couldn't resist. I spent nights poring over numbers, building quiet files of evidence. Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. The patterns began to emerge like stains under light. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. If I made one wrong move, he would crush me before I ever had the chance to strike. That's when I met Ethan Carter. Ethan was a journalist, sharp, curious, and reckless in ways I wasn't. He had come to the firm looking for insights into financial scandals, and when his eyes met mine over a stack of ledgers, something sparked. Not romance, not yet, trust. He asked me questions others were too afraid to ask, and when I hesitated, he leaned in and said quietly, "People like your father don't deserve to keep winning." I froze. My father? I hadn't told him anything, but Ethan had done his homework. He knew who I was. He knew what Hayes Industries was hiding. Instead of fear, I felt a strange relief. For years, I had carried the burden alone, choking on silence. Now, for the first time, someone else saw the monster I had always known. We sat in a quiet cafe, and I told him pieces of my story. Not everything, just enough. His eyes didn't widen in pity or horror. they hardened with resolve. "You don't want justice," he said slowly, as if reading my thoughts. "You want revenge." I didn't deny it. He slid a small notebook across the table. Inside were contacts, lawyers, whistleblowers, insiders ready to bring Hayes Industries down. He had the connections. I had the inside knowledge. Together, we had a chance. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was hunting. Ethan and I became shadows in the city. By day, I wore the mask of a respectable accountant. By night, I traced every crooked number Hayes Industries tried to bury. We met in dingy apartments, late-night diners, and anonymous offices. My files grew thicker. Hidden offshore accounts, bribes disguised as consultancy fees, ghost employees receiving salaries. Every discovery was a knife, sharpened and waiting. Ethan was relentless. He'd charm an insider for information, then spend nights cross-checking it with my spreadsheets. He taught me how journalists worked, how stories were built not from rage, but from evidence solid enough to burn in courtrooms. Still, he reminded me constantly, this isn't just about money, it's about power. If you want to take him down, you'll need more than proof. You'll need to break his allies too. That thought thrilled me and terrified me. One night, as we spread papers across his small apartment floor, Ethan asked, "Do you ever think about what comes after? After he falls?" I paused. I had imagined his ruin 1,000 times, but the after had always been a blur. I admitted, "I don't know who I'll be without my revenge." He studied me quietly, then said, "Maybe that's when you'll finally start living." I didn't answer, because a part of me feared he was right. Weeks into our investigation, I couldn't resist the pull any longer. I went back to the town I had once escaped, the town of bruises and whispers. The old house hadn't changed. Paint still peeled from the shutters, weeds strangled the garden, and behind the windows lurked the same suffocating silence. My father wasn't home, but my mother was. She opened the door and froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then her trembling hand rose to her mouth as though she feared even my face was forbidden. "Isabella," she whispered. Her voice broke me more than any belt ever had. We sat in the dim kitchen, drinking tea that tasted of memories. She looked older, worn thin by years of surviving. I wanted to tell her everything, about the freedom I'd carved, the man I had become allies with, the plan I was building, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I asked quietly, "Does he still hurt you?" Her eyes darted to the hallway, even though he wasn't there. Then she nodded once, quickly, like confession was a crime. Rage swelled inside me, but I swallowed it. I took her hand, fragile, bony, trembling, and I whispered, "It won't be like this forever. I promise." For the first time in years, I saw hope flicker in her tired eyes. When I left, I didn't look back. The house behind me was no longer a prison. It was a battlefield waiting for me to return. And this time, I wouldn't come as a frightened child. I would come as the storm. Information had its own scent. It clung to people like expensive cologne or cheap whiskey. Ethan always said that if you watched long enough, you'd know who was hiding secrets. That's how we found Richard Cole, my father's longtime financial officer. He was loyal on paper, but loyalty had cracks when money was involved. I had seen his name in too many suspicious transactions, funds shifted into accounts that shouldn't exist. Ethan and I staged it carefully. I arranged a chance meeting with Richard at a high-profile business event, introducing myself as a fellow accountant curious about Hayes Industries. A few glasses of wine, a little flattery, and he loosened up. "You wouldn't believe the things Ivy had to cover up for that man," he muttered one night, laughter masking his guilt. I leaned closer, pretending to be amused. Inside, my pulse raced. I was dancing on the edge of fire. Over weeks, Richard grew comfortable with me. He bragged about offshore dealings, hinted at false audits, and eventually slipped up. He mentioned a hidden server where Hayes Industries kept records too sensitive for normal storage. The key was in his office. That single slip of the tongue was worth more than gold. Because once we had that server, we would own my father's empire. The night we decided to act, the city was drowning in rain. Perfect cover. Ethan and I waited until the building's security shift changed. I wore black, my hair tied tight, adrenaline pulsing in my veins. For years, I had walked past this company as a child, imagining it as untouchable. Tonight, I was about to walk inside. Richard's office was an too difficult to breach with Ethan's contacts providing codes and distractions. My fingers shook as I slid the flash drive into the server port. Files began to copy. Transaction records, private communications, contracts signed under shadows. Every second felt like an eternity. I could almost hear my father's voice booming through the halls, his rage vibrating against my skin. Then footsteps echoed outside. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips, pulling me into the darkness behind a cabinet. 2 guards walked past, their flashlights slicing the room. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but they kept moving. When the files finished copying, I slipped the drive into my coat. It felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of every childhood bruise, every tear, every promise I'd whispered in silence. As we slipped out into the rain, Ethan laughed breathlessly. "You realize what you've just done?" "Yes," I said, clutching the drive. "I've stolen his kingdom." But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Because my father wouldn't crumble easily, he would fight. And when he realized who was behind this, the war between us would finally begin. The stolen files sat on my desk like a silent beast waiting to roar. Ethan and I combed through them for days. Bribes to politicians, offshore laundering, shell companies hiding stolen funds. It was enough to destroy Hayes Industries from the ground up. But I underestimated him. My father was many things: cruel, ruthless, arrogant, but never stupid. By the end of the week, whispers reached me. Hayes Industries had tightened security, legal teams worked late into the night, and Richard Cole, the loose-tongued insider, suddenly stopped answering calls. Ethan frowned over the files. "He suspects something. He'll start looking for the leak." I tried to stay calm, but my stomach twisted. My father had built his empire on fear, and he ruled his enemies the same way. If he suspected me, he wouldn't come at me directly. He'd go for the weakest point. That point was my mother. The call came at midnight. My mother's voice trembled on the other end. "Isabella." "He knows." I froze. "What do you mean?" "He's different. He's been watching me, asking questions about you, where you live, who you see." Her breath hitched. "Tonight he said something. He said, if she thinks she can betray me, I'll remind her whose blood she carries." The phone almost slipped from my hand. My worst fear was unfolding. He hadn't just suspected, I was in his crosshairs now. I whispered, "Mom, listen to me. Stay quiet. Don't tell him anything. Whatever happens, trust me." There was silence, then a choked sob. "He'll hurt you, Isabella. He always hurts what he can't control." Her words set my blood on fire. After the call ended, I sat in the dark, my fists trembling. For years, I had dreamed of revenge, imagined his downfall, planned every move. But this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was survival. Ethan watched me from across the room, his jaw set. "He's coming for you." I nodded, my voice steel. "Then let him come. This time, he won't find a frightened child. He'll find the enemy he created." My father's threats were never idle. When a man has ruled your life with fear, his anger becomes a map, predictable, cruel, and terribly efficient. It started with small things: strange cars idling outside my building, texts from blocked numbers, a man at the cafe who asked too many questions about my shifts. Then one afternoon, I got a short, cold message on an unknown line. "Bring the drive. Come alone. If you don't, she pays." My blood ran cold. My mother. He had found a way to use her like he always had, as bait and as punishment. Ethan read the message over my shoulder and didn't flinch. "He's trying to scare you into making a mistake," he said. "If you go alone, he could plant something, take the drive, or worse." I thought of the countless times my father had cornered me in smaller rooms, punished me with words, with fists. The instinct to run back to the safety of anonymity rose in me for a second, but then another feeling swallowed it, anger sharper than fear. I would not let him terrorize my mother again. Not now, not ever. We built a plan quickly, like surgeons prepping for an operation. Ethan called in a favor with an old friend at the police, enough to have a car tail the meeting and a shadow team nearby without blowing our cover. Olivia, who had become my backbone in the weeks I couldn't say the word revenge without shaking, arranged a decoy. My mother would stay safely hidden at a friend's house. A woman would come in her place, someone trained to act like her, to wear her clothes, to mimic her mannerisms, so that if Richard tried to hurt her, he would find a staged scene and a recording instead. When the day came, my hands didn't tremble as much as I expected. I walked into the public park, the autumn air sharp against my face, the drive tucked into an inner pocket. A lone bench, a statue of a forgotten hero, and a man in a tailored coat waiting like a vulture. He stood when he saw me, his face composed into that mask of paternal authority he wore like armor. "Isabella," he said, voice smooth. "You should have known better than to steal from family." I sat, calm, and placed the drive on the bench between us as if it were a trivial thing. "You taught me how to number accounts," I said quietly. "I just learned better math." He smiled sickly and reached out to pick up the drive. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misread the plan. But his fingers brushed metal and froze. A hidden speaker crackled near a trash can. A voice, not mine, filled the air. "Richard Hayes, recorded evidence shows money moved to shell corporations under your name." He looked up, startled. His eyes darted to the shadows where Ethan's tail car idled. Men in plain suits emerged slowly, not as an army, but as witnesses. My father's face paled, not with fear for himself, but with fury at being exposed. "What did you do?" he hissed, low and dangerous. I leaned forward, my voice soft as falling glass. "You used my mother as a weapon. I used your arrogance as one." His jaw clenched. In that moment, he understood two things: that I had the evidence, and that I knew how to use it. He didn't lash out physically, at least not in public, but the light in his eyes went cold in a way I had never seen. He realized he'd been played. It was a small victory, and a message. I left him on that bench with the drive between us and a law waiting at the edges of his life. My mother was safe, hidden and watched, and my father had just tasted the first real humiliation he'd ever felt outside our house. I expected him to strike back with lawyers, threats, and his usual brand of intimidation. What I didn't fully expect was how recklessly he would try to reclaim control. Within 48 hours, Hayes Industries issued a terse statement, denying any wrongdoing and promising full cooperation with authorities. The press chattered and then moved on, but Ethan wasn't satisfied. "They'll smear you as a disgruntled daughter trying to settle scores," he warned. "We need a public, undeniable blow, something that makes the court of public opinion sit up and listen." So we planned the counterstrike. Precision, timing, and a humiliating reveal in front of the people who mattered most: his investors and the board. I would not scream my betrayal from rooftops. Instead, I would hand them the proof in a way they could not ignore. Ethan arranged a small internal seminar at a financial conference where Hayes Industries was scheduled to present. He convinced an influential auditor to allow a short interjection from an external consultant. That consultant would be me. They didn't know the consultant's true identity, just that I was an expert in forensic accounting who uncovered an anomaly in an industry peer. I rehearsed the speech until my voice was steady and cold. I wore a simple suit, hair pulled back, nothing dramatic. I would be the professional, the outsider with numbers, not the vengeful daughter. That mask was my best weapon. When the moment arrived, the auditorium was full. Investors, board members, journalists. I walked to the podium and spoke calmly about patterns that matched embezzlement, described how shell companies were used to siphon funds, and then, without melodrama, displayed the documents on the big screen. Bank transfers, timestamps, email threads where my father's signature appeared. The room changed. Phones emerged. People leaned forward. The man who'd led that company for decades sat motionless, the color drained from his face. I watched Collins, stone-faced, flip through the pages we'd provided to the auditor. His expression shifted from discomfort to fury, and then to resolve. Men who had once toasted my father now exchanged glances. Decisions were being made in whispers. When I finished, I did not wait for applause. I stepped down, walked past my father with a look that said everything I had learned in years of silence. He didn't look up. He couldn't. Outside, cameras swarmed. Headlines the next day were clinical, precise. Forensic auditor presents evidence against Hayes Industries. No melodrama, no daughter's revenge, just facts that could not be ignored. That night, as we watched the coverage, Ethan put his hand on mine. "You didn't just protect your mother," he said. "You ripped the rug out from under him." I thought of the nights I spent under bruises, the shoebox of coins, the long nights studying ledgers. For the first time, the pieces of my life fit together into something that hurt him where it mattered. His empire, his pride, his public mask. Revenge, I realized, was not a scream. It was a slow, surgical unmaking, and we had only just begun. 3 days passed in a blur of paranoia. Every corner I turned, every shadow I saw, felt like his eyes were on me. Father had unleashed his men who didn't just follow orders, but lived to please him through cruelty. One evening, as Ethan and I left a cafe, I spotted them. 2 black SUVs parked across the street, windows tinted too dark, engines humming, though no one stepped out. "They're watching," Ethan muttered, pulling me closer. "They want me scared," I whispered, but my voice carried defiance. "I won't run." That night, I received an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, no name, just a single photograph. My mother standing by the window of her house, unaware. Written across the photo in my father's sharp handwriting, "Family is fragile. Don't break it." I clutched the photo so hard my nails cut into the paper. It wasn't just a warning, it was a leash. A reminder that he still believed I was the child he could control. But I wasn't. Not anymore. "Then we hit back," Ethan said firmly, slamming the files shut. "He thinks fear will silence you. Prove him wrong." We spent hours drafting a plan. My father's empire thrived because of 3 things: dirty money, loyal henchmen, and political shields. If we could cut off even one, the rest would crumble. Ethan suggested leaking selective documents to the press, but I shook my head. No, not yet. I want him to feel it first. I want him to know it's me. So we chose a different weapon: exposure with precision. The next morning, an anonymous email was sent to his closest allies: board members, senators, business partners. Attached were bank records tying him to embezzlement and bribes. Not the whole truth, but enough to plant doubt, enough to shake the ground under his throne. By afternoon, phones were ringing off the hook at Hayes Industries. Whispers of betrayal spread through the halls. For the first time in years, my father wasn't the one controlling the narrative. That night, Ethan looked at me with a rare smile. "You've just lit the fuse." I met his gaze, my hands steady despite the storm I had unleashed. "And I won't stop until the fire consumes him." The fallout was immediate. Hayes Industries' stock dipped overnight, partners pulled back, and the press began circling like vultures. My father's empire, built on decades of intimidation, suddenly looked vulnerable, and Richard Hayes was furious. I knew it even before the news reached me. His rage had a way of rippling through the city. Board members resigned under pressure, journalists were silenced, and one of his loyal lieutenants mysteriously disappeared. Then came the inevitable. I returned to my apartment late one evening to find the door unlocked. My heart stopped. Ethan drew his gun, stepping in first. The living room was pristine, untouched, except for one thing. On the coffee table, a glass of my favorite wine. Half full, still warm. And beside it, a handwritten note. "You've grown bold, Isabella, but don't forget, you are mine, always were, always will be. Father." My legs almost gave way, but I steadied myself. He had been here, in my sanctuary, breathing my air. A message clearer than words. "I can take everything from you anytime I want." For a moment, the frightened child in me wanted to collapse, but then another fire rose in my chest, the adult he had forged through pain. And I whispered into the silence, "Not this time." The confrontation came sooner than I expected. He summoned me, not with a call, but with force. 2 of his men cornered me outside a bookstore, their grip iron as they pushed me into a black car. Ethan tried to fight them off, but the last thing I saw was his blood on the pavement as the door slammed shut. They drove me to the mansion I swore I'd never step foot in again. The gates loomed like the jaws of a beast, swallowing me whole. And there he was, Richard Hayes, my father, standing at the center of his empire like a king whose crown had slipped but not fallen. His tailored suit, his silver hair, his piercing eyes. He hadn't aged, he hadn't softened. If anything, he looked more dangerous than ever. "Isabella," he said, his voice smooth like poison. "My disobedient little girl returns." I held his gaze, refusing to bow. "Your reign is ending." He laughed, a deep, cold sound that echoed against the marble walls. "You think a few papers and whispers can bring me down? I built this world with blood, and I'll drown you in it if I must." For the first time in years, I stood inches from the man who destroyed my childhood. And instead of fear, I felt clarity. He was not a god, not invincible, just a man, corrupted, cruel, and terrified of losing control. And I, his daughter, was the storm he never saw coming. Richard's footsteps echoed as he circled me like a predator measuring his prey. His voice dripped with false warmth. "You have spirit," he said, smirking. "That's good. It means you're mine. You've always had my fire. But fire, Isabella, is only useful when controlled. Uncontrolled fire." He leaned closer. "Burns everything, including itself." I refused to flinch. "What do you want?" He paused, studying me with sharp, calculating eyes. Then he spoke the words I least expected. "Join me." I froze. "Stand beside me. Take what I've built. Be the queen to my empire instead of trying to burn it down. You think you're fighting me, but you're really fighting yourself. Everything you are, your strength, your defiance, comes from me. Don't betray your blood." His hand brushed my cheek, and bile rose in my throat. I wanted to tear his fingers off, but he wasn't finished. "If you refuse..." His smile widened, cruel and calm. "Your friend Ethan will vanish. Your mother's heart will stop. And the world will know you as the ungrateful daughter who destroyed her own family. Either way, you will serve me." The deal wasn't a deal. It was a leash disguised as an opportunity. And I knew. This was his final attempt to own me. Silence stretched between us. For the first time since childhood, I realized he was waiting for me, not commanding me. Beneath the arrogance, there was fear. Fear of losing me, fear of losing control. I let out a small laugh. It startled him. "You think I want to inherit your empire?" I whispered. "Why would I settle for scraps of a rotten kingdom when I can build my own from the ashes of yours?" His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "You won't survive this war," he hissed. "I already survived you," I said, my voice steady as steel. And that was the hardest part. For a brief moment, his mask slipped. I saw the man behind the monster, aging, desperate, furious that his child wasn't bending to him anymore. Then his hand shot out, gripping my wrist hard enough to bruise. "You'll regret this, Isabella." I leaned in close, my lips almost brushing his ear. "No, father. You will." The night after our confrontation, the war began. I woke to Ethan's number flashing on my phone. But when I answered, it wasn't his voice. It was a recording. A scream, muffled and raw. Ethan's scream. Then my father's calm, venomous voice followed. "You had your chance, Isabella. You refused. Now I take what matters to you, piece by piece." The call ended. My chest tightened, rage and panic twisting together. Ethan had been my anchor, my ally in this storm, and now my father held him like a trophy. I rushed to the safe house we had set up for emergencies, but it was already compromised. Doors smashed, papers scattered. The message was clear. He could reach me anywhere, anytime. For a moment, I almost broke. My old scars reopened, whispering that he would always win, that he had always won. But then I remembered Ethan's words. "Don't let him define you. Not anymore." And just like that, the fear turned to fire. If he wanted a war, I would give him one. I didn't go to the police. My father's power reached too far. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. Instead, I struck back where it hurt most, his empire. Using the files we had gathered, I sent an anonymous package to an international watchdog organization. Unlike the local press, these people couldn't be bought. Offshore accounts, fake charities, laundering schemes, it all landed in their hands. Within hours, the headlines hit the global stage. American business titan linked to international corruption. The world my father had manipulated for decades suddenly turned its gaze on him with suspicion and hunger. His stock plummeted further. His political allies went silent. Investors backed out. And to make sure he knew it was me, I left him a single message delivered through his own boardroom. You took Ethan. Now I take your crown. The monster who had ruled my life was bleeding, and this time the wound was public. But I knew what was coming next. Richard Hayes wasn't a man who surrendered. He was a man who retaliated. And if he had Ethan, it meant he was baiting me for the ultimate showdown, and I was ready to walk into the fire. The message came in the form of a video. Ethan, bloodied, tied to a chair, but alive. His eyes burned with defiance even through the pain. Behind him, the cold marble walls of my father's private mansion. Then Richard appeared on the screen, dressed in his immaculate suit as if nothing had touched him. He leaned toward the camera, his smile carved from cruelty. Return what you've stolen, Isabella. Stop your childish war. Walk back into my house willingly, and I'll give you your little friend back. Refuse, and you'll watch him die one scream at a time. The video ended, replaced by silence. For a moment, I stood frozen. My worst nightmare was unfolding, history repeating itself. My father using the people I loved as pawns in his game of power. But then a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't the girl he broke years ago. This was the woman forged in his fire. He wants me to walk into his cage, I whispered. Ethan's words echoed in my memory. Sometimes the only way to kill a beast is to step into its lair. And I decided I would, but not as prey, as executioner. I planned carefully. The mansion was a fortress, armed guards, surveillance cameras, motion sensors. Breaking in wasn't impossible, but breaking out with Ethan alive? That was suicide. Unless I turned his own arrogance against him. Richard believed I was broken enough to come crawling back. So I let him. I walked to his gates alone, dressed in black, my face calm. The guards searched me, sneered, and escorted me inside. They thought I carried nothing. But what they didn't know was that my weapon wasn't hidden on me. It was hidden in them. A virus Ethan had helped me plant weeks ago in the mansion's security system. The moment I stepped inside, I triggered it. Lights flickered, cameras glitched. Doors that should have locked stayed open. And Richard Hayes, standing at the top of the marble staircase, watched me with pride and fury in equal measure. You came back, he said, his voice echoing, just as I knew you would. I met his gaze, unflinching. No, Father, I didn't come back. I came to end this. The mansion had changed. It wasn't the home I remembered. It was a labyrinth designed to confuse and trap. Corridors stretched endlessly. Doors slammed shut behind me, and every step echoed with menace. Ethan's muffled voice reached me from somewhere deep inside. A cry of pain, short, sharp, forced out of him. My chest tightened, but I pushed forward, the virus still keeping cameras blinded. But my father had planned for this. The deeper I went, the more I realized he wasn't hiding Ethan. He was leading me to him. Every hallway light that flickered back on, every unlocked door, was an invitation. Finally, I reached a grand chamber, dark, silent, except for one spotlight. In its center was Ethan, tied to a chair, blood on his face but eyes still burning with strength. I ran forward, only to stop dead. The floor beneath him was wired. Tiny red dots blinked in a pattern I recognized instantly. Motion-triggered explosives. From the shadows, his voice came. Calm, mocking. You didn't think it would be that easy, did you, Isabella? Richard Hayes stepped into the light, his eyes glinting with triumph. He circled Ethan like a showman revealing his masterpiece. One step too close, he said smoothly. And your dear friend will paint these walls. I told you before. Everything you love belongs to me. My fists clenched. You won't kill him. You need me here, and if he dies, I'll burn everything you have left without hesitation. He laughed, slow and deliberate. You think you re-in control because of a few headlines and a virus in my cameras? This is my world, Isabella. You only live in it. His words were poison, but I could see it, the cracks in his mask. He was furious, desperate, lashing out with the only thing left: fear. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Ethan's eyes met mine, a silent message passing between us. Don't break. Find the opening. So I steadied my voice and stepped closer, not toward Ethan, but toward my father. You're right, I said quietly. This is your world, but worlds fall, and kings fall hardest. For the first time, he faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. The battle between us wasn't just about power anymore. It was about survival, his or mine. My father's smirk widened as I inched closer. Careful, Isabella, he taunted. One wrong move and you'll be the reason your friend ceases to exist. I kept my eyes locked on his, refusing to glance at Ethan, because if I did, the fear in me would win. Instead, I let my words strike. You've already lost, Father. I gestured to the explosives. This is desperation. Kings don't set traps. They command armies. And you're nothing but a man clinging to the ashes of power. His jaw twitched. I'd hit the nerve. As he stepped forward to shut me up, my fingers brushed the trigger device hidden in my sleeve, Ethan's virus-linked override. One quick tap, and every red light around Ethan flickered, then died. His eyes widened in realization. The bombs were dead. Richard Hayes hadn't noticed, yet. I whispered, "You don't control me anymore." And then I moved. He lunged at me with surprising speed, his hand like iron around my arm. Years of cruelty had made him strong, but years of surviving him had made me stronger. I shoved back, my nails digging into his wrist until he growled. The marble chamber echoed with our struggle, the sound of fists, of fury, of decades of silence finally breaking. "You ungrateful child," he roared, slamming me against the wall. "Everything you are, I gave you." Blood filled my mouth, but I spat it out, glaring into his eyes. "No. Everything I am. I built from what you tried to destroy." With a surge of rage, I kneed him in the gut, forcing him back. Ethan, now free from the disabled trap, strained against his ropes, shouting my name. Father came at me again, this time pulling a blade from his coat, a gleam of steel under the dim light. "If you won't be mine," he snarled, "then you won't be anyone's." I steadied myself, my body aching, but my spirit unbroken. The years of fear were over. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and I was ready to end it. The knife gleamed as my father slashed at me. I dodged, the blade grazing my arm, hot pain searing through my skin. But I didn't back away. He came again, faster, his fury giving him strength. Every strike carried years of control, of arrogance, of belief that he was untouchable. I blocked, I ducked, I fought back with everything I had. The marble floor echoed with the sound of our war. Metal against fists, grunts against cries. Finally, his blade caught my side, ripping through my dress and flesh. I staggered, blood soaking warm against my ribs. He smirked, the predator thinking he had won. "You see?" he hissed. "You are still weak. You'll always be the broken little girl I raised." My knees threatened to buckle. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized something. He wasn't powerful. He was terrified of me. And that fear gave me the last strength I needed. I grabbed his wrist, twisted with all the rage of my childhood, and the knife clattered to the floor. Now it was his turn to bleed. He lunged barehanded, roaring like a beast cornered. We crashed into the table, shattering glass and wood, his hands locked around my throat, squeezing his face inches from mine. "This ends with you," he spat. Darkness clawed at the edge of my vision. For a heartbeat, I saw the terrified little girl I once was, gasping for air. But then, I saw Ethan, bound but fighting to break free. I saw my mother, living in chains of fear. And I saw myself, not broken, not weak, reborn in fire. With the last of my strength, I reached for the fallen knife. My hand closed around the handle, and I drove it into his side. His eyes widened in shock. The grip on my throat loosened. He staggered back, clutching the wound, blood spreading across his perfect suit. "You," he rasped, staring at me like he didn't recognize his own blood. I rose to my feet, trembling but unbroken. "No, Father. You end with me." He collapsed, the empire he had built crumbling with him, the king of cruelty, silenced at last. The chamber fell into stillness except for my ragged breaths and Ethan's desperate shout as he finally tore free from his ropes. Richard Hayes was gone, and for the first time in my life, I was free. The night after my father's death was the quietest night of my life. Not because the world had grown silent, but because for the first time, the voice that haunted my every breath, his voice, was gone. I sat in my room, staring at my hands. They didn't shake. They didn't ache. But I couldn't stop seeing his blood on them, even though I had washed them a dozen times. The scent lingered in my nose like an invisible brand of guilt. I should have felt victorious. I should have laughed, screamed, celebrated. Instead, I cried. I cried like the little girl who once begged her father to stop. I cried for the childhood he destroyed, for the innocence he burned, for the girl I could never get back. The monster was gone, but he had left pieces of himself inside me. Broken pieces, sharp edges, and I wondered if I would ever stop bleeding from them. That night I whispered into the dark, "Father, you're dead now, but the scars you left on me, they're still alive." The next morning, I stood at the edge of the old house as smoke rose from the fireplace where I had burned his belongings, his coat, his letters, his photos. Every memory of him that could be turned to ash, I destroyed it. People in the town whispered about his sudden death. They called it fate, karma, punishment from God. No one suspected me. They couldn't imagine that the quiet daughter, the broken, fragile girl, could be capable of such wrath. But I knew. And that secret became both my curse and my crown. For the first time, I walked through the village without fear. No one owned me. No one controlled me. I was free. But freedom didn't taste as sweet as I had imagined. It was bitter, sharp, laced with loneliness. Because when you kill your monster, you also kill the only war that defined your existence. And then the question remains, who are you without your pain? Days turned into weeks, and I thought freedom would heal me. But instead, guilt settled inside me like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. At night, I would dream of his face, not the cruel one, but the rare, softer version, the man who once lifted me on his shoulders when I was 5. My mind twisted memories, confusing the monster with the father I once hoped he would be. I hated him. I loved him. I killed him. The cycle played in my head like a broken record. One evening, while staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror, I whispered, "Did I become him? Did I let his cruelty turn me into the very thing I feared?" For the first time, I wasn't sure if I was the avenger or just another villain born of his shadow. I decided to leave the village. Every corner reminded me of him. Every whisper, every stare felt like invisible chains. So I packed a small bag and boarded a train to the city, a place where no one knew me, where my past couldn't follow me. The city was loud, alive, indifferent. For the first time, I felt anonymous, and that anonymity was a strange kind of comfort. I found work in a small bookstore surrounded by stories that weren't mine. At night, I would read tales of people who suffered, fought, and survived. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I smiled. Slowly, very slowly, I began to believe that survival wasn't enough, that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. I wasn't healed yet, not even close. But as I shelved another book and felt the scent of ink and paper around me, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I had a choice. And choice was the beginning of freedom. One rainy evening, as I closed the bookstore, I found myself writing a letter I would never send. It began simply, "Dear Father." I poured everything onto the page, the rage, the grief, the betrayal. I told him how he ruined me, how he made me hate myself, how I destroyed him so he could never hurt me again. But in the end, my hand slowed and the words softened. Despite everything, a part of me still wished you were different. A part of me still wanted to love you. When I finished, I folded the letter and burned it in the fireplace. Watching the flames devour my words felt like watching chains dissolve into smoke. For the first time, I realized revenge had given me justice, but forgiveness, silent, private forgiveness, was giving me peace. Not forgiveness for him, but for me, so I could move forward without his ghost dragging me back. Years later, I still carry the scars of my childhood. They are not invisible. They are etched into the way I speak, the way I trust, the way I live. But I no longer hide them. They are not marks of shame. They are proof that I survived. Sometimes people ask why I live alone, why I never married, why I spend so much time in stories. I smile and tell them, because I've already lived 100 lifetimes in my past, and now I choose peace. My father's shadow will always linger somewhere deep inside me, but it no longer controls me. I turned his cruelty into my strength. I turned my revenge into my freedom. And as I watch the sunrise from my apartment window, I whisper the words that once felt impossible. I am free. I am mine. I am whole.